zombie apocalypse movies always focus on the zombies. The real danger would probably be everything else. Gridlocked roads, empty pharmacies, no fuel deliveries, no power, no clean water, millions of frightened people trying to figure out what's happening at the same time. That part already sounds a lot more realistic. Today's video is going to be a little different from usual. No, I don't think zombies are about to start wandering through the streets, but zombie apocalypse scenarios actually make a surprisingly good preparedness exercise. They combine pandemics, infrastructure collapse, panic buying, communications failures, civil unrest, and long-term survival into one scenario. Strip away the undead, and there are some very real lessons hidden underneath all the fiction. So today, we're looking at what preppers can actually learn from surviving a zombie apocalypse. Welcome to Prepper's Paradigm, your channel dedicated to practical prepping and disaster preparedness. As always, I use a computer-generated voice because my own is difficult to understand due to an injury. Today's video is a little more lighthearted than some of the topics I normally cover. I'm not predicting the end of the world, and this isn't a warning that zombies are about to appear outside your front door. But zombie apocalypse stories have always been surprisingly popular with preppers, and honestly, it's not hard to see why. A good zombie scenario combines almost every major preparedness challenge into one situation. You've got panic, shortages, disease, communications failures, dangerous crowds, infrastructure collapse, supply chain disruption, and the challenge of surviving long-term when normal life stops functioning properly. That's also why so many zombie movies and shows overlap with real preparedness topics. A lot of the same skills and equipment that help fictional survivors would also help during real disasters. Some people even got interested in preparedness through zombie books, movies, and games in the first place. So in this video, we're going to have a bit of fun with the topic while also looking at the realistic side of it. We'll talk about what zombie movies get wrong, what they accidentally get right, the gear and skills that would actually matter, and what preppers can genuinely learn from these fictional survival scenarios. Zombie apocalypse stories might sound ridiculous on the surface, but they work because they tap into fears that are very real. Take away the zombies themselves, and what you usually have left is a society dealing with fear, confusion, collapsing infrastructure, shortages, violence, and uncertainty. That part doesn't require science fiction at all. A lot of zombie scenarios actually resemble a combination of several real disasters happening at the same time. Part pandemic, part grid failure, part civil unrest, and part long-term survival situation. That's one reason why the prepper community has always had a strange connection with zombie fiction. It gives people a way to think about preparedness without talking directly about specific real-world disasters. It's also why governments and organizations have occasionally used zombie-themed preparedness campaigns in the past. The fictional scenario grabs attention while still teaching useful concepts like emergency planning, food storage, medical preparedness, and evacuation planning. Shows like The Walking Dead and movies like 28 Days Later or World War Z became popular partly because the human side of the disaster feels believable. People panic, systems fail, resources become limited, rumors spread, communities fracture. Those are all things we've seen happen during real crises to some extent. Even smaller events have shown how quickly normal life can become unstable. Panic buying during the COVID pandemic gave people a small glimpse of how fragile supply chains and public confidence can be. Of course, real disasters usually don't involve hordes of undead roaming the streets. Still, the preparedness lessons underneath these stories can actually be surprisingly useful. That's especially true when you start looking at how people react during emergencies, because human behavior often becomes more dangerous than the disaster itself. If a zombie outbreak ever did happen, the first few days would probably be the most dangerous part of the entire event. Not because of zombies everywhere, but because nobody would know what was actually happening. Some people would ignore the warnings completely. Others would panic immediately. Social media would fill with rumors, fake videos, conspiracy theories, and bad information within minutes. Meanwhile, stores would empty fast. Food, bottled water, fuel, medications, batteries, generators, and anything remotely connected to emergencies would disappear almost immediately. We've already seen smaller versions of this during hurricanes, winter storms, pandemics, and fuel shortages. Roads would likely become a disaster as well. Some people would try to flee cities immediately, while others would wait too long and get trapped in traffic. Gas stations could run out of fuel quickly, especially if deliveries stopped or panic buying started. Emergency services would also become overwhelmed very fast. Hospitals already struggle during major emergencies, and a large-scale crisis involving violence, infection, or mass panic could overload them almost immediately. That's one thing zombie movies often get right. The collapse usually doesn't happen because of the zombies alone. Fear and confusion do a huge amount of damage by themselves. Prepared people would have a major advantage during this stage because they wouldn't need to join the panic buying crowds. They could stay home, gather information, avoid unnecessary travel, and make decisions more calmly. That's one of the biggest real-world preparedness lessons hidden inside zombie fiction. The earlier you prepare, the fewer dangerous last-minute decisions you need to make when something actually goes wrong. Zombie movies almost always start in cities, and honestly, that probably makes sense. Large urban areas would be incredibly difficult places to survive during almost any major collapse scenario. Huge population density, limited escape routes, dependence on daily deliveries, and large crowds would create serious problems very quickly. Even without zombies, cities become difficult during major emergencies once fuel, food, power, and transportation start failing. High-rise apartments could become especially dangerous if elevators stop working or water pressure fails. A lot of people also have very limited food and water stored in urban environments simply because space is tight. Suburban areas will probably fare slightly better in the beginning. Houses often have more storage space, access to vehicles, and lower population density than city centers. Some people may already have generators, grills, gardens, or additional supplies. Still, suburbs remain heavily dependent on outside infrastructure. Grocery deliveries, electricity, fuel stations, internet access, and municipal water systems all play a major role in daily life. Rural areas would likely offer the best long-term survival potential in many scenarios. Lower population density alone would reduce a lot of risk. Access to land, wells, wood fuel, hunting, fishing, and food production could also become extremely valuable during a long-term collapse. Of course, rural life comes with challenges too. Medical care may be far away. Supplies become harder to replace. Isolation can create its own risks, especially for smaller households. Zombie fiction also loves the idea of remote cabins and islands. In fairness, some of those locations actually make sense from a defensive perspective. Natural barriers can reduce risk significantly. At the same time, isolation only works if you already have enough supplies, tools, skills, and long-term sustainability to survive there. Running into the wilderness with a backpack sounds great in movies. Real survival would require a lot more planning than that. Honestly, the best location in most situations would probably be the one you already know well and have properly prepared in advance. Zombie movies tend to focus heavily on weapons, but real survival usually comes down to much less exciting equipment. Clean water would matter far more than having 12 different tactical gadgets hanging off a plate carrier. A reliable water filter, stored food, medical supplies, backup lighting, radios, durable clothing, and ways to cook without grid power would probably become far more valuable than a lot of the gear Hollywood focuses on. Good boots alone would likely matter more than half the weapons people argue about online. If you can't walk long distances comfortably, avoid injuries, or stay dry in bad weather, survival gets difficult very quickly. Bicycles would probably become incredibly useful as well. Most zombie movies ignore them completely, even though bikes are quiet, fuel-free, relatively easy to repair, and capable of covering long distances quickly. In many situations, they would make far more sense than giant armored trucks burning through fuel supplies. Simple tools would also become extremely important. Axes, saws, hand tools, lighters, rain gear, cooking equipment, tarps, and repair kits may not look exciting on camera, but they solve real problems. Radios would likely become valuable for gathering information when internet and phone networks fail. Solar chargers and small power stations could also help keep critical devices operating longer. Zombie fiction sometimes creates the impression that survival is all about fighting. Realistically, avoiding danger would usually be the smarter strategy. Noise discipline would matter a lot too. Movies constantly show survivors firing loud weapons in crowded urban areas without attracting every threat nearby. Real people tend to underestimate how far sound travels, especially at night. That's another reason why practical gear matters more than flashy gear. Staying warm, dry, hydrated, informed, and mobile would probably keep you alive longer than trying to look like an action movie character. One of the biggest debates in the prepper community also shows up constantly in zombie fiction. Do you stay home or do you leave? A lot of movies immediately push survivors onto the road, but bugging out during a major crisis can be extremely dangerous if you don't already have a realistic destination plan. Roads could become blocked with abandoned vehicles, fuel may become difficult to find, and large crowds of frightened people would create serious risks by themselves. Constant movement also burns calories, uses supplies quickly, and exposes you to weather, injuries, and unpredictable situations. For many people, bugging in would probably be the safer option, at least during the early stages of a crisis. Your home already contains supplies, shelter, tools, clothing, and familiarity with the area around you. You know the exits, the weak points, the nearby resources, and the local risks. That doesn't mean every home would remain safe forever, though. Urban apartments with no backup water, homes in dangerous areas, or locations directly affected by violence or infection could eventually force people to leave. That's where having backup plans becomes important. A proper bug out plan should involve more than simply grabbing a backpack and heading into the woods. You need a destination, multiple possible routes, enough supplies to reach it, and realistic expectations about what conditions would actually be like. Zombie movies often make wilderness survival look easy. In reality, long-term outdoor survival without proper shelter, food production, medical care, and equipment would become extremely difficult for most people. That's especially true during winter or bad weather. The best strategy would probably depend heavily on the specific situation. A short-term localized emergency may favor staying home, while a rapidly deteriorating situation in a densely populated area could make evacuation necessary. Either way, making those decisions before a crisis starts gives you a huge advantage over people trying to figure everything out at the last second. Zombie movies can teach some useful preparedness lessons, but they also get a lot of things completely wrong. One of the biggest examples is ammunition. Hollywood characters somehow manage to fire thousands of rounds for years without ever running out, cleaning weapons, replacing parts, or dealing with malfunctions. Realistically, ammunition would become difficult to replace very quickly during a long-term collapse. The same goes for fuel. Characters constantly drive large trucks across empty roads as if gas stations will somehow stay full forever. In reality, fuel shortages would probably begin almost immediately once supply chains stop functioning properly. Movies also love showing abandoned stores full of untouched supplies years after the collapse. Realistically, heavily populated areas would get stripped clean very quickly. Food, medicine, batteries, tools, fuel, and hygiene products would disappear fast. Noise discipline is another huge one. Zombie survivors in movies often shout constantly, slam doors, use loud generators, and fire unsuppressed weapons in crowded areas without much concern. In a real survival situation, drawing attention to yourself repeatedly would be extremely risky. Then there's the physical side of survival. Characters rarely seem exhausted, dehydrated, sick, or injured for very long. They sprint endlessly while carrying heavy gear and somehow avoid infections despite terrible hygiene and constant exposure to danger. Real survival would probably involve a lot more exhaustion, stress, illness, and physical decline than movies usually show. One thing zombie fiction does sometimes get surprisingly right, though, is the psychological side of collapse. Fear, panic, denial, selfishness, bad leadership, rumors, and poor decision-making would likely create enormous problems during any major disaster. Human behavior can become very unpredictable when people feel desperate or frightened. That's probably one of the most realistic parts of zombie fiction. The undead may be fictional, but human reactions to fear definitely are not. A lot of people focus heavily on buying gear for survival scenarios, but skills would probably matter far more in the long run. Expensive equipment helps, but only if you actually know how to use it properly. A person who understands water purification, food preservation, first aid, navigation, gardening, repairs, fire starting, and basic security would likely have a major advantage over someone with thousands of dollars of gear and very little practical experience. Fitness would matter too. Zombie movies often show survivors constantly moving on foot, carrying supplies, climbing obstacles, sleeping poorly, and dealing with high stress for long periods. Even without zombies involved, that kind of lifestyle would be physically demanding very quickly. Medical knowledge could also become incredibly valuable. Small injuries become serious problems fast when hospitals, pharmacies, and emergency services stop functioning normally. Cooking skills matter more than people sometimes realize as well. A lot of stored food still requires preparation, fuel, water, and some understanding of how to use basic ingredients properly. Repair skills will become important too. Clothing, tools, bicycles, generators, radios, and other equipment may eventually break. During a long-term crisis, replacing items may become impossible. Mental resilience might matter more than anything else, though. People who stay calm, adapt to changing conditions, avoid panic, and make rational decisions under stress would probably fare far better than people who completely fall apart emotionally. That's another reason zombie fiction appeals to so many preppers. Beneath all the action scenes, a lot of these stories are really about adaptation, resilience, and problem solving during extremely difficult conditions. And honestly, those are useful skills for almost any real-world emergency as well. At the end of the day, zombie apocalypses make good preparedness scenarios because they force people to think about how dependent modern life really is on stable systems. Electricity, fuel deliveries, grocery stores, pharmacies, communications networks, clean water, and emergency services all feel permanent right up until they stop working properly. That doesn't mean society would instantly collapse during every disaster, and real emergencies are usually far less dramatic than movies make them look. Still, recent events have shown that supply chains and infrastructure can become strained surprisingly quickly under pressure. Zombie fiction exaggerates those problems to the extreme, but underneath all the chaos and undead hordes are some genuinely useful preparedness lessons. Store some food and water before you need it. Have backup plans. Learn practical skills. Stay physically capable. Avoid panic. Think realistically about where you live and how dependent you are on outside systems. Those ideas still make sense whether the threat is a hurricane, a blackout, civil unrest, a pandemic, or something far less dramatic than a zombie apocalypse. That's probably why these stories remain so popular with preppers. Not because people expect the dead to rise from the grave, but because zombie fiction gives people a way to explore preparedness, survival, and resilience through a scenario that's entertaining while still containing a surprising amount of truth underneath the fiction. Thanks for watching. Today's video was obviously a little more lighthearted than some of our usual topics, but hopefully it also showed why zombie apocalypse scenarios overlap with real preparedness more than people sometimes realize. Now I'm curious what you think. Would you bug in or bug out in a zombie scenario? What do you think would become the biggest real-world problem during the first few weeks? And which zombie movie, show, or game do you think handles survival and preparedness most realistically? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the Prepper's Paradigm website for more practical preparedness content. And remember, the zombies may be fictional, but supply shortages, infrastructure failures, and panic definitely aren't. Stay safe and keep preparing.